Welcome and thank you so much for coming and spending time, and for those of you also joining us online. My name is Rachel Rodriguez, and I wanted to let you know that the letters behind my name are not MD or PhD, they are MOM. I don't believe that those letters disqualify me, nor do they invalidate the truths that I'm going to share with you today. In fact, I think it makes them more relatable. I began the journey as a mom looking for health education for my teenage daughter, and I recognized that the need was far greater than for just my family. So here we are 2 years later in pursuit of a better way to help families learn and communicate. So if you're following along in a handout online, notice that the first page I've listed and what we're going to cover, it's extensive. In fact, it might feel a bit like drinking from a fire hose. But let's be honest, as parents, we are busy, so we're going to cover a lot of ground since you made the effort to be a part. Your next page shows a quote from the Health Framework posted on the California Department of Education's website. Guest speakers and media resources, including books and videos, should always be vetted for appropriateness, for compliance with state statutes and district protocols to ensure the content they are providing is valid, age-appropriate, and medically accurate, and unbiased. The content, should you choose to read all 752 pages of that health framework, shows a clear disregard in its own policy in this statement. Those images that you're seeing are taken directly from resources made available to our kids. It might be difficult to see the image, but those are Pokemon condoms. Sex Etc. and other websites and books are listed as recommended teacher resources. These images are tame in comparison to the bulk of resources that are recommended, like the screenshot of a book that I've put into your handout. Our Choose Health program aims to provide content that genuinely is age appropriate and medically accurate. We also intend to provide tools for parents so that you can discuss choices with your children based on your own social, moral, or spiritual biases. We acknowledge the research that shows parents still have the greatest influence over their children, and we support parents in their right to guide their child to make healthy choices. So now we're going to move on to page 4, talk about coping skills. Studies show that healthy coping skills are not being taught in the majority of families. Even with the trends of parenting blogs, books, and websites, we're seeing a generation ill-equipped for the hills and valleys of life. In case the term healthy coping skills is new to you, let's start with a basic example. So if your kid is getting picked on at school and tells you about it, you might reply with something similar to one of these options. Option 1, just ignore them. They are looking for attention, and if you ignore it, then they will stop. Option 2, you don't deserve to be treated that way. If they do that again, just go off on them. Option 3, I'm going to put a stop to this. I'm going to email your teacher and the vice principal. Don't you worry, I'm going to take care of all of this for you. Option 4, let's talk. Is what they said about you or the names that they called you the truth about who you are? What do you think you could say to them if this happens again? Maybe you can see your parenting reflected in one of these options predominantly. So let's review those responses and talk about what kind of coping skills it could encourage for your kids. Okay, so let's look at option 1. Ignoring might seem like a good strategy and can honestly be an easy fix in some situations. But that is the sneaky side of ignoring as a coping skill. It can open our kids to want the quick fix, to avoid confrontation, and even lead to finding unhealthy outlets to numb themselves from problems. Left unmanaged, wanting to ignore problems and numb ourselves from challenges can lead to addiction, food, substances, technology. Option 2, on the surface, telling our kids to stand up for themselves seems like the right choice. However, what boundaries are established with this kind of response? Your child getting picked on is not okay, but be careful with the words you use to respond that can encourage a victim mentality. Our words matter. Do your words encourage them to identify as remaining a victim, or instead working towards victory? Responding in a way that lashes out in anger is a precursor to reacting with aggression. Option 3, our kids need our protection from harm, period. Yet in this situation, we might be the most harmful person in their lives. Stepping in to resolve every challenge for our child instead of with our child can actually instill weakness of character. At the very least, this coping skill can lead to indecisiveness and an inability to take constructive criticism. At the worst, your child could wilt at every problem and hide away from any challenge out of a fear of failing. Later in life, they could seek out unhealthy relationships with domineering personalities who will make every choice for them. Okay, let's move on and look at option 4. Talking through the challenge with your child puts them in the driver's seat to resolve their problem. Ask them questions about how they want to respond and then encourage them to try. Then, here's the hard part, parents. Let them, even if it's not the method or the words that we would have chosen. After they choose a method, make sure that you take the time to evaluate the choice with them. Even if they do not like the results of their first attempt, the process of getting them to evaluate different solutions is important. Different solutions means developing healthy coping skills. So how do we make this happen? Reality is we all want what's best for our kids, but how do we get to this point of working through a challenge? If you had very different styles modeled for you, then you'll have to be intentional on shifting your approach. Honestly, it's beneficial to make a habit to daily pray over how you respond to your children and helping them work through a challenge. Let's go through some tips sticking with our first hypothetical situation. The first thing you need to do is acknowledge, and it could sound like this: I'm sorry they hurt your feelings. I know that can be really tough. And when you talk about it, it looks like you are mad or sad, maybe confused or overwhelmed. How do you feel? The second step is respond. Encourage your child to go back to them and tell them that what they did or said was not true or that it was hurtful. Oftentimes, kids only carry out their bullying tactics if they can do so without confrontation. The third step is respond again with help. If the first attempt to resolve the conflict was not effective, then they need to know that they can get help, not just ignore the problem. Taking an authority figure or an unbiased person can look different depending on the scenario. A second grader could bring in the class teacher. A ninth grader is going to feel much more comfortable bringing in someone like a coach, an older sibling, or a youth leader. This can be a bit more challenging for the person with authority to be unbiased, but it's going to fulfill two goals. It shows the person bullying that your child has support in this battle, which can often diffuse their aggression. It also creates a buffer between the two kids with someone who is actively listening to both sides. Last, evaluate. Likely your kids will try a variety of responses when faced with a problem, and that's okay. In fact, it's encouraged. That is their way of testing out different healthy coping skills for different situations. We get to encourage this by helping them evaluate their choices. Ask them what they will try to do differently next time. Making the time to help your kids talk through their choices is, in my opinion, one of the most critical areas of helping them to be healthy. Our number one goal should be keeping the dialogue open. Notice I said dialogue, in case you might be like me and use slightly more words than the average person. I'll go through a potential scenario at some point and give you some ideas to encourage more airtime for your kid's voice. Thankfully, most of our children will not encounter a severe or escalated conflict. Working on these steps to diffuse a squabble with a sibling or a classmate is going to be much more common. However, bullying should not be taken lightly, especially in the wake of cyberbullying turned fatal. If someone continues after considerable effort to physically or emotionally harass your child, then take action. Our point is to open the door for communication. This way you will be able to better discern when something is serious. For those of you who are familiar with the parable of Jesus, you will recognize Matthew 18:15-17. God is clear that there is order to how we address conflict. If kids are taught to always have an adult come in to fix it or to ignore it, then they're not only developing poor coping skills, they're being taught a response contrary to God's method. So we went into detail with one hypothetical situation, but we need to adopt healthy coping skills as a family in general. If you wanted to raise your hand and ask how, you would likely not be alone. So I want you to turn to page 5 of your handout and let's go over 3 areas of focus. Implementing these 3 keys will bring a solid foundation to healthy choices for your family. In all 3 areas, we need to find ways to write it, to model it, and to practice it. So number 1, positive self-talk. Number 2, admit when we are wrong. And number 3, one thing at a time. To break them down, I'll give you an example for each one. However, there's lots of space on your handout that you can come up with ideas, and I encourage you to connect with other parents to get their ideas also. A suggestion for number 1, put a Post-it on your bathroom mirror, fridge, or even your car dash with a quote or verse reminding yourself of your strengths and what your purpose is. You could even let your kids catch you reciting out loud. Declaring isn't necessarily part of what you're seeing on your slide, but maybe some of you have seen the power of speaking positive affirmations like I have. We know it can shift everything. So maybe notes to yourself as a departure from your personality. Can you start a tradition of finding 3 things that you're grateful for in the morning or at bedtime? Try writing them in a notebook. Okay, question. Our kids copy us, fact or fiction? Yes, I know, it's so true. Model for your kids to admit when you are wrong. This can be tough if it was never modeled for you. Some of us might have grown up in an environment where parents were authoritarian and used phrases like, because I said so, or do as I say, not as I do. If your kids see you ask for forgiveness from each other as spouses, just for small things, it's a perfect example of how to admit their wrongs with their siblings and friends. Asking your child for forgiveness when you've made a mistake carries a lot of weight. My children can attest to the fact that I have lost my cool, raised my voice, and barked out instructions way more times than I want to admit. They would also attest to the fact that I have come to them after and corrected it. I might say, I was wrong to snap at you. I'm having a hard time because I don't feel well, or it was a hard day at work. But that's not your fault. Will you forgive me? Or it could have been a legitimate conflict with your child. I have humbly said, I was frustrated that you didn't listen to me, but I should not have responded with yelling at you. I'm sorry. I also really encourage you to use the words, will you forgive me? It's something that carries so much more weight than just saying, sorry. It's something that your kids should really learn to use that phrase with their siblings and their friends also. It carries so much more weight. Here's how I know this is a win. At around age 14, my older daughter would start owning her part in the conflict in the moment. It's something that she would reply that she forgave me, and then she would admit that she should have listened and that she was sorry. My younger daughter started to adopt healthy responses like this at an even younger age. I think it's because she had a big sister modeling it for her also. Humility can feel prickly, but it opens the door for communication and a stronger relationship. And open communication with our kids is so vital. Practice does not make perfect, so don't expect it, but you can expect progress as the fruit of your practice. We parent, therefore we are busy. Yes? Without some structure to address priorities one thing at a time, we can get overwhelmed. We can look at the pile of tasks and find it much easier just to avoid them altogether. An idea for number 3 is to show your kids that it takes practice to juggle it all, like using maybe a list or a calendar. In fact, some of your kids might be a huge asset with this kind of activity. When there are things left on that list, let them know you're okay with leaving it for tomorrow so that you can enjoy dinner as a family, so that maybe you're up for still going to their baseball game, even though you have something in your inbox. I end with this example because without carefully choosing to practice the day-to-day and the challenges of life with a one-step at a time plan of attack, then we could be modeling avoidance. Ouch, I know. Before we move on to this next topic, I wanted to acknowledge something. I know that you've invested time and resources for this seminar in hopes of gaining some tools to teach maybe your very young children. They're barely learning how to walk and talk, and you're on the path of prevention. Your goal is to try to help them before you have challenges arise. However, I know that there's others of you who are here or watching online, and you're saying to yourself, if this lady only knew how many books I've read, but I'm at the end of my rope with my teenagers. Some of you wonder if there's any hope for your kids who are on a destructive path. And let me first encourage you that we're going to send you home with some tangible strategies to redirect them and put them on a path of choosing health. And let me tell you why I personally believe it's something to be hopeful for. I'm living proof. To briefly share, I was on a destructive path in my youth, and I made a series of unhealthy choices. Some of it was from examples set before me, but a lot of it was like a domino effect. My family legacy was addiction, broken relationships, and anger management issues. As a child, I never would have thought of getting high several times a day to numb myself from the challenges of life. It creeps up. It's one small habit of avoidance at a time. Maybe there's a well-meaning family member or a friend who sees a child having a difficult time and says, let's go out for ice cream. Don't get me wrong. Going out for ice cream can be a great tool in our arsenal as parents, but do we only go when there's a sad day? We can use this as an open door for communication, as a way to get our child to redirect their sadness, their anger and hurt, and process why they felt that way. Or we could use it as a quick fix to cover up the pain with hot fudge and whipped cream. So before we move on to the next video, I do want to point out that last point I spoke about, it shows the importance of what we demonstrate to our kids and to specifically guard against modeling avoidance. Avoidance leads to addictive behaviors. Imagine with me how some trends can play out. Yes, avoidance run rampant, can lead to addictive tendencies in a variety of areas. But did you know that all of us are made to crave? There's potential for addiction based simply on the chemicals that are released in our brains and our guts during digestion. So in our upcoming video, we're going to elaborate on this a lot more, because it's important to understand that the choices that we make and understanding how the chemicals in our bodies work have a lasting impact on a variety of the choices that we make in life. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next video.